Alrighty, everyone. This is meteorologist Timmy Albertson here with you guys. Hey, we got ourselves our Franklin is now a hurricane out in the open waters. We'll take a look at that. We also have a new tropical system that we are going to be taking kind of a quick little look at. And right now it is tropical depression number 10, but it could very well become our next named system. We're also tracking a few storms down across Tennessee that may affect the Vanderbilt game and a little later on here, but. All things considered, kind of at least thunderstorm wise, it's a little bit quieter today than it has been over the past few days, though there was randomly a little thunderstorm in Illinois today that surprisingly produced a what may actually be a little tornado. So we'll know more about that maybe later on this evening. But in the meantime, though, we're going to go ahead and start off with the tropics, as I'm sure some of you guys are pretty curious about. Now, you've seen me talking about Tropical Storm Franklin. Well, that became a hurricane earlier on today. And now it is Hurricane Franklin, sustained winds of 85 miles an hour. Now, the National Hurricane Center is actually expecting that Franklin is going to continue to kind of gradually intensify, possibly becoming a major hurricane, which means category 3 or above. Right now, it's a category 1 hurricane, and that's what I forgot to do. I forgot to put the list up for you guys to show you, the wind speeds needed for, each one of those categories. But long story short, it's expected right now it's a category 1. It'll likely continue to intensify as we go through the overnight tonight, heading into the day tomorrow, and then eventually becoming a category 3 hurricane as we maybe start off early this coming week. So it's likely going to be staying mainly out in the open waters. It will pass off to the west of Bermuda, but the center of it at least will likely stay well off towards the west. You see that little cone graphic there that the Hurricane Center puts out. Just keep in mind with that cone is that that's just showing where the center is expected to be. It could kind of fall within most likelihood somewhere in that cone during those particular times. So the effects we know of a hurricane typically extend out from the center. So even if it's not necessarily in the cone, there could still be some effects. Just a little side note. We'll talk more about exactly what the cone means and everything else as we go forward over the next few days. But again, that is Hurricane Franklin. Look, it's trying to become the strongest system so far of the season. Mind you, it doesn't have a lot of competition. It's been kind of quiet so far, but that's likely going to be changing. Now, we do have another system right now. It is Tropical Depression number 10, and it is located just off the Yucatan Peninsula, right in between Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, right now, it's got winds of about 30 miles an hour. It's still kind of weak. It's still pretty young, but it's likely going to kind of continue to get better organized as we go forward through the rest of the weekend. And then it's not only expected to become a tropical storm later on, and it'll probably get, if it does, it'll receive the name Adalia. Yes, the names are chosen well in advance. It's actually a list that repeats every 6 years. We'll talk more about that later. If anyone's got questions, maybe someone wants to know, maybe we can go into the sidebar about that. But for right now, that is kind of with Tropical Depression number 10. Now, it's likely going to become a hurricane as we go into maybe the start, on the day Tuesday, and then possibly intensifying a little bit more and then making a landfall. Right now, it looks to be, what is that, near Tallahassee. I cannot remember the city that is southwest along the coast there. But right now, it kind of appears to be where the landfall may happen, and that'll probably be sometime Tuesday night, again, possibly doing so as a hurricane. So again, right now, Tropical Depression number 10 likely will become Adalia later on, sometime, either later tonight or maybe into the day tomorrow, gradually intensify into a hurricane and making landfall there. Of course, we'll keep an eye on that system. It will have a little bit of a watch party when it gets closer to lands, and we can pick it up on the radar and everything. Also, for those of you who do enjoy tropical weather, we do have a typhoon all the way out in the Pacific Ocean. Its name is Saola. It's right up near the Philippines at this time, just kind of hanging around, not really moving much. It is about a pretty decent size hurricane with winds about 125 knots. Forgot to let me do the calculation really quickly for what that is in wind speeds. It's probably going to put it right around 100 and about 40-mile-an-hour winds there. So, in the Atlantic Ocean, this would be considered a Category 4 hurricane. But again, it's out in the Pacific Ocean, so it's a typhoon. They have a little bit different of a classification there. It's not actually looking like it's going to be making a landfall in the Philippines, despite the fact that it is right up against them. And it's probably going to go out in the open waters a little bit, maybe intensify even further, and then eventually it'll make a way towards Taiwan, possibly there, and then into mainland China uh, later on next week. So again, that's kind of the strongest system right now out in the in the oceans, and that is again, as mentioned, typhoon. So Saola, I believe. I'm not exactly 100% certain how to pronounce that name, but overall, you get the idea. Yeah. So right now, let's see here. Its winds are. Yeah, yeah. So it's about 120 knots or so. So like I said, it would be considered about a Category 3 hurricane, high end Category 3 or low end Category 4 hurricane if it was in the Atlantic. It looks very nice here on the satellite imagery. This is infrared. This is not a radar image. This is just measuring the temperature of the cloud tops. The strongest winds of that hurricane, right, or typhoon, I guess technically because it's out in the Pacific, but same thing. It is basically known. If you look really carefully, you can see the center there of that typhoon. And the strongest winds tend to be right in an area known as the eye wall, which surrounds the eye. That's where you see those strongest winds. So this whole thing does not have, that 120 plus mile an hour winds. It's just generally kind of a small area, relatively speaking, within the actual tropical system that does tend to have it. So that's a look over at the tropics at this time. So things kind of starting to get a little bit active, which we'd expect for this time of the year. Now, with that in mind, we're also seeing, naturally the start of college football. Earlier on this morning, I posted a video with a forecast. So I don't think we need to go through that again, but those places are probably going to be seeing at least somewhat of some hot weather, especially the Louisiana Tech game later on today and the New Mexico game. New Mexico State, I guess I should say, they'll probably have temperatures right around the mid 90s for a high today. So still going to be pretty hot when that game kicks off. The Vanderbilt game is going to be starting, I believe, in, let's see here, what time that game is to be starting. I got to make sure it's going to be in Central Time, which is the time zone over there anyway. Vanderbilt, for those of you who don't know, is Nashville, Tennessee. That's at least where it is. Their game is going to be starting up at 6:30 Central Time. It's about 4:20 Central Time right now, so we still got another 2 hours. And as mentioned, they might be dealing with at least a few scattered showers and thunderstorms during that game. So let's go ahead and we'll flip over the radar really quickly here, and we'll take a look what's going on over that way. So I'll go ahead and flip the screen here for you guys so that you're able to see it. And take a look at that. We're seeing scattered showers and thunderstorms all across that area. Though Nashville, you can see here, is right here. That's Nashville. There's Hendersonville. And here's kind of a grouping of scattered showers and thunderstorms that we've been kind of watching over, pretty much the past few hours. They're not really moving much. There's a lot of outflow. It's just kind of running into each other and popping up new storms. If we were to actually kind of loop this a little bit, you would see that this storm line is interestingly just kind of more or less jumping at times. And again, that's those outflows kind of, kind of running into each other more or less there. So that is kind of what's going on there. Now, for that game, at least taking a look at the radar right now, it appears that many of those storms will generally stay off towards the west, but that's not to account for some of the activity over around the Clarksville area. That might try to drift maybe close to Nashville as we go into the, over the next couple of hours. And so, again, for those of you who might be watching that game, however you may be doing so, or even, randomly if anyone watching this happens to be going to the game, which I'd imagine they'd probably already be there, so that's not watching. But there will probably be at least some scattered shower and thunderstorm activity that will have to be kind of kept an eye on there. We'll see if it affects the game any. But certainly hot and humid there nonetheless in Nashville. Look at this is over at the one of the observation points there. It is 93 degrees right now, right around the Nashville area, dew point 73 degrees. So again, very hot, very humid air mass, and that's kind of helping these showers and thunderstorms to just kind of maintain themselves. But again, upper level steering is kind of a little bit weak there, and that's what's keeping these guys moving kind of slowly. If we kind of zoom a little further down down to the south, you can see these guys just kind of bubbling up a little bit, not necessarily moving all too quickly. And really, kind of what we've been seeing with this activity is that it's more or less just kind of jumping along. And again, it's all those outflows just kind of running into each other. So somewhat of a hot, humid air mass nonetheless, but we will kind of keep an eye on those. We're also watching some other showers and thunderstorms all the way out in parts of Missouri. Now, what's interesting is we have a little bit of an upper level disturbance that is swinging around the base of an upper level trough way off towards the north and to the west or northeast over the Great Lakes and back into Canada. But still, when you see that disturbance, it's just enough to kind of kick up some of these showers and thunderstorms. Now, you might have seen the video. We were taking a look at some of those storms earlier on when they were just slightly further up towards the north. Again, they haven't really moved too much. But some of these storms at times have been, kind of producing a little bit in the way of some small hail and even some locally gusty winds. This particular storm that we see here right on the Arkansas border, or just north of the Arkansas border, south of Van Buren, Missouri, again, has possibly the little bit of around, quarter-size hail. So again, nothing too strong, but certainly enough that it's prompting that severe thunderstorm warning. Also, another storm down around the Batesville, Arkansas area. And we see with these storms here is that's also kind of, once again, a little bit more of a similarity, just kind of a little bit of some small hail in there, maybe some locally gusty winds. These storms are moving at least a little bit more than the storms out across Tennessee area. If we were to go ahead and kind of loop this radar imagery here, you see that at least these guys are kind of moving a little bit faster, albeit not quite the fastest, but still enough that we're not seeing quite as much of the outflow running into, I guess I should say, that we've seen with the others. But nonetheless, you get the idea. This is not necessarily an organized severe weather event, just more or less these very, pop-up type of showers. Well, I guess more than just pop-up showers and thunderstorms, as after all, they're, quite a bit in the way of coverage area there. But again, at least these ones are moving a little bit. We are seeing at least some pockets here and there of some hail. And again, kind of a good example would be this storm right here. You can just see it just kind of wobbling its way down a little bit to the south and to the west, while these other guys are just kind of drifting around. So there's a lot of outflow is just kind of running into each other here and there, and that's making it a little bit of a stormy afternoon across parts of the upland south, heading back over into Tennessee. So again, kind of the weather-wise for today's football games, kind of the most activity is going to be, as mentioned, right up around the Nashville area with the Vanderbilt game. Yeah, we'll see how the weather affects that game. If most of those storms stay just off towards the west, most viewers probably won't even notice. But if those storms do try to drift a little bit more towards the east into the Nashville area, well, that could be interesting. Some rain and maybe even, obviously lightning and thunder. That would actually probably delay the game just a little bit. So certainly some active weather, at least still somewhat going on. And naturally, there's always quite a bit of weather, no matter where you would look. But for the most part. Now, earlier I mentioned that there may have actually been a little tornado all the way up in Illinois earlier on today. It was actually very strange. And I have to look more into the atmospheric conditions. They are reporting that it did happen, and let me go ahead here and see if I can't flip up the reports for you guys. It actually happened right here around this area, and from the sounds of it, it doesn't appear that it was a big tornado, but it might have still been one nonetheless. We'll go ahead and see if we can't get the reports from it. Yeah, here it is right here. And it's actually it was I looked back at the radar when it was happening, and it was very difficult to see anything on the radar. So let's see here. That was a land spout. Okay, that makes more sense. Land spouts are kind of tornadoes, but they're also kind of not. They have a slightly different mechanism behind them, but because they are a rotating column of air that does reach down to the ground, they are classified as a tornado. But there is a little bit of a difference with them. So it looks like, yeah, they're two little land spouts. So technically, yes, there were tornadoes, but again, that makes a little bit more sense. It wasn't, one of those big tornadoes that you would see there. So we can talk more about land spouts in another time there. Again, as mentioned, they're not unusual. They are, like I said, technically classified as a tornado, but they are also kind of technically not necessarily. It gets really weird, again, in the weather world. We see these guys kind of forming sometimes ahead of the thunderstorm, and landspouts are quite interesting, nonetheless. I guess they're almost probably more akin to a water spout, if that makes any sense. Water spouts also kind of being a kind of tornado, but also a slightly different set of rules. There's a lot of things in weather, folks, that you're going to learn as we go forward in these chats. There's always exceptions to every rule, and there's oftentimes things that are related that might not be the same. There are things that might not appear related, but actually are the same. And that's one of the fun things about weather that you'll quickly find out is that there's always exceptions to rules, and there's often some pretty interesting reasons why. So again, with those scattered storms out across the Tennessee area, again, as far as college football is concerned, that's probably going to be the biggest one to kind of keep an eye on. Will be the Vanderbilt game starting in about what, an hour, 2 hours now. So see if those storms manage to make it out there. Also got a few little storms way out here in parts of far western Virginia. That little part that sticks right out there. Let's see what this little guy's doing. They got a severe thunderstorm warning that's out around Wyethville. And it looks like it was probably just, yeah, a little bit of probably some gusty winds with that storm just based on the shape. Again, it looks like that warning is probably going to expire. This special weather statement is going to take over for a little bit here probably, and it's going to be about 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts up to about 40 miles an hour, so not a very strong storm at this point. It was probably strong for just a little bit, but not so much anymore, kind of weakened off. So overall, that is kind of a look at what is going on, at least thunderstorm wise. Now, that heat is still going on across much of the deep south. There are excessive heat warnings that are up all the way across Louisiana and other parts of the deep south, but they're not really seeing right now too much in the way of thunderstorm activity, though there will be the possibility for some pop-up showers and thunderstorms there. Holy cow, look at this number, guys. It's 107 degrees right now over at Shreveport. Look at that, 107 degrees, dew point 66. Oh boy, that's got to be putting that heat index way, way into the hundreds. I mean, the temperature is already there. That is impressive. I've been through Shreveport, and it was hot and humid when I went there, so I can't even begin to imagine what 107 degrees there would feel like. That is pretty nasty there. So there's probably going to be some pop-up showers and thunderstorms anyway, just given the position of the frontal boundary. It does look like there is a cold front that is trying to push its way through Oklahoma. Let's see maybe if we can't go ahead and get some of the surface charts on here. Let's see here. Get out of the full screen mode. We're going to take a look to see maybe if we can't take a look at where the latest surface charts are here. See if we can't flip that on, see if that cold front's still advancing. Oh, it has since stalled out briefly. Okay, well, that makes a little bit more sense. So, again, pop-up showers and thunderstorms maybe around the Shreveport area as we go into the evening hours, but it looks like the relief from the heat is still going to be a little ways away, as we're going to be seeing that frontal boundary is just kind of slowly has actually stalled out right across Oklahoma. And I bet that's making for an interesting temperature contrast. Let's take a look here. May not be quite as defined as it would be, let's say, if it was wintertime. But if we take a look at this, these temperature maps here, I'm going to go ahead and flip off the station plots here for you guys. And we'll take a little bit of a look here at just solely the temperatures. And go ahead and flip that over here. Let's take a look here at just the temperatures. We can get a little bit of an idea of this frontal boundary. Take a look here. There we go. We can see kind of a little bit better detail there. Yeah, upper 90s right now in Oklahoma City. I got a family member who lives, actually, I got a couple family members who live in OKC area. And it's always hot there, especially in the summertime. But notice not quite as warm around the Woodward area. Again, they're on the that part of Oklahoma is behind the frontal boundary, so not quite as hot. A little bit more of a relief there, but still hot nonetheless. And I just cannot get over that 107-degree reading out in Shreveport. That is really, 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 really hot. I mean, especially because down there it is just all humidity. Lafayette, I have been there. There's some great restaurants there, by the way. If you ever want some good food, Lafayette's got quite a few good restaurants down there. 103 degrees. Sweet Lord, that is hot. Wow. That's about as that's hot. 70-degree dew point. That is, I mean, it was upper 90s when I was there, and that was bad enough. So I can't even imagine what triple digits is like down there. Wowie. Well, actually, interestingly though, fun side fact for you guys is that the typically the hottest time of the year for some of these places, especially down deep south, is actually the month of August. There's quite a few reasons for that. Part of it has to do with the ocean, and, the fact that it takes a little bit longer for that to cool down. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Some of these far southern locations sometimes happen to have their hottest weather in August. Most other places tend to have it over in July. San Francisco has theirs in September. That's when their hottest weather is, and that also has to do in part with the ocean. So some places tend to get their weather at their hottest time of the year at slightly different times, and it is certainly the case all the way down in the deep south. Wow, that is just miserably hot down there. Let's take a look and see here. I'll flip back over to the radar in just a second here, but we'll take a look. And we do have a few little showers that down around the Lake Charles area, trying to give a little bit of relief from that heat. But oh boy, it does not look like it's going to be very much relief. Let's put it for you that way. It's just more or less those storms that are just going to add to the heat and humidity rather than take away from it. So, with that in mind, for those of you who might now just be joining in here, we're going to take one more look over at the tropics. As mentioned, we do have Hurricane Franklin now. Finally, got out of that terrible environment and is now a Category 1 hurricane, 85-mile-an-hour sustained winds. It's likely going to become a major hurricane, a Category 3, as we go our way towards as we move our way towards the start of the work week. It'll round Bermuda. It's going to pass to the west of Bermuda. Bermuda might still get at least a little bit of some effects from it, but it will not be getting a direct hit. And then it's likely going to start turning to the north and to the east, keeping it away from the east coast. But again, might maybe be at least a little bit of an increased wave activity along maybe some parts of the east coast. Mind you, still looking a little far out for that. But overall, Franklin is mainly going to be staying out in the open waters, though it will become a Category 3 hurricane. At least that's what's expected of it to do. It'll mainly be staying out in the open waters, not really affecting anyone other than some fish and some boats, some shipping lines. But that'll be about it. So we also have the brand new one, though, and this is likely going to be the talking point. This will most likely be the next storm of the century of the week, and that is going to be Tropical Depression number 10 right now, all the way out the Yucatan Peninsula. It is looking pretty organized. It's still pretty young. It still needs to intensify a bit more. It's still got a little ways to go, but it's likely going to become our next named storm, and if it does so, it'll receive the name of Idalia, and then it will become once it becomes a tropical storm, it'll get its name. And then it'll mainly work its way into the Gulf of Mexico and likely become a hurricane shortly before making landfall in the Florida Panhandle sometime maybe Tuesday night. And as I mentioned earlier, hey, maybe we'll have a hurricane watch party for it when that does happen. So again, that is kind of one system that will have to be watched a little bit. We'll certainly be talking about and keeping an eye on as we go forward over the next few days. With that in mind, too, I did show one other fun one. It's not just hurricane season in the Atlantic Ocean. It's almost always hurricane season in the West Pacific, and we do have a pretty decent typhoon that is out there in the Pacific Ocean out near the Philippines. And before I show that, I want to double check on the wind speeds for it. Let's see here. Hopefully this might kind of make the internet a little jumpy here for a quick moment, but we'll go ahead and I just want to double check on Saola's wind speeds. Maximum winds are 120 knots. Okay, so it's 120 knots, not 125 like I mentioned earlier. So we'll go ahead and flip over Saola here, and look at that. That is a pretty decent sized hurricane. Well, over there they call them typhoons. Same thing. It's got 120 knot sustained winds, which would put that to about 140 mile an hour, 135 to 140 mile an hour sustained winds estimated within that storm. So that would make it the equivalent of a Category 4 hurricane if it was in the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean. Again, the 120 mile per hour, 140 mile per hour winds do not extend the entire hurricane. What you see here on the bottom left of your screen is an infrared satellite imagery. That is not a radar image. That's just cloud top. So the whole thing, yes, is technically the hurricane, but that whole thing is not hurricane conditions. As a matter of fact, that 140-mile-an-hour sustained winds would be located in something called the eye wall, which is generally kind of a small area that surrounds the actual eye of the hurricane. And that's where you tend to see your most damage. That's where you see those strongest winds, and that's where the maximum winds of a hurricane are found, is in the eye wall. So most of this is likely not 140 miles an hour, just a very small portion of it, but it is still enough to get it its rating at least. And hurricane force winds probably do extend a little bit outwards from that center, though again, because this is not from the National Hurricane Center, I believe this is going to be for the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. They do their stuff a little bit differently, and it's not too often I have to work with some of that detail there, but they're expecting that it's generally going to be staying away from land. Well, it's right up on the Philippines right now. Might be a little hard to see, but it is just off the coast of the Philippines, only about, 180, 190 nautical miles away from the capital city of Manila in the Philippines. But this guy is going to mainly stay out in the water over the next couple of days, and then it'll likely begin to turn to the north and to the west, maybe taking it towards southern Taiwan, and then eventually into mainland China. It'll probably intensify a little bit more before it does hit Taiwan, but then when its glancing blow with Taiwan will probably cause it to weaken enough that when it does slam into mainland China, it probably will not be nearly as strong as what it is now, but certainly still pretty interesting nonetheless. And I'll tell you what, you think that the hurricanes are strong in the Atlantic Ocean, they tend to be much stronger, relatively speaking. They tend to be a bit stronger out in the Pacific Ocean, more room to work with, not as much land, and just overall sometimes better conditions. So sometimes you get some pretty wicked typhoons out there. Though interestingly, if I remember correctly, I believe that the tropical system with the strongest winds was actually an East Pacific hurricane. That was Patricia back in 2016, I believe, and that was ridiculous. I think it had over 200-mile-an-hour winds. But interestingly, with Patricia, is that when Patricia hit land, she made landfall in Mexico, but in like one of the least inhabited spots it could have picked. And then it also ran right into the mountains. So you had this hurricane that had over 200-mile-an-hour sustained winds. This thing ran right into land and just quickly weakened. I think within 36 hours, it was no longer a tropical system. So it was pretty interesting to have this massively strong tropical system that ended up just by chance making landfall in a pretty remote area. And not only that, but in an area with a lot of mountains, and it just, boom, just fell apart not long after that. So, yes, Pacific ones tend to be stronger. But again, even though on average, probably those, central typhoons in the Western Pacific, I believe on average tend to be a little bit stronger than the other ones. But we're only talking, we're only talking by a few miles an hour and stuff like that. But the biggest typhoon was in the West Pacific, and that would have been Typhoon Tip back in 1979. That thing was just ridiculously huge in terms of size. It actually only is estimated to have about 165-mile-an-hour winds, which we've had hurricanes with way more than that. But it was just pretty interesting nonetheless. So, and then the smallest one would have been, well, it used to be Cyclone Tracy. And that was in 1974. Cyclone Tracy made landfall in Darwin, Australia on Christmas Eve back in 1974, I think. And it was absolutely tiny. It was like a Category 3 equivalent, but it was incredibly small. It was only like the hurricane force winds only extended 30 miles out from the center. All right. And this thing had, 120 some mile an hour winds. So, I mean, that is very, very, very small size, but it hit Darwin head on, and really damaged up that city quite a bit. But it it just was one of those. What are the odds? That this tiny thing would hit, one of the few cities in northern Australia head on. And yeah, so they come in all shapes and sizes. So that's a look at the tropics. Like I said, we'll talk more about the tropical depression number 10, which is out in the which is going to be entering into the Gulf of Mexico towards the end of the weekend and into the start of next work week. That's likely going to become Idalia, our next named system, and then it could very well become a hurricane before making landfall somewhere in probably the Florida Panhandle. So we'll keep an eye on that hurricane. We also got Franklin, which is still expected to intensify a bit more. We'll keep an eye on Franklin too, and naturally we'll keep an eye on storms and weather and anything else that happens to be happening in the area. So I know it's Saturday evening, everyone, and y'all probably want to get back to your football games. And by the time some of you guys probably watch this, it'll be maybe tomorrow. So we'll have probably another little weather chat sometime tomorrow. We'll take another look at the tropics. Again, we'll talk about that, and we'll see if there's any active storms going on in the area. So in the meantime, everyone, I'm meteorologist Timmy Albertson. I hope you enjoyed tonight's weather chat here, and I look forward to seeing you guys back at the next one. Like I said, we'll probably do one sometime tomorrow, albeit maybe a little bit earlier. We'll have to see with the we'll have to see how our tropical systems are doing, because that'll probably dictate when we do them. But overall, you get the idea. And then, as mentioned, we do them every week. We do these weather chats every weeknight. So make sure you tune in for that. Hope you'll have a good rest of your evening, everyone. And keep on